Good evening and welcome to the LA Steel Show. I'm Lila. I'm your host for tonight's show. I'm here in Winsted, Connecticut at the Northwest Community College. Ralph Nader, presidential candidate, is speaking here today. I hope you should find the show informative.
Thank you very much, Joe. You know, this is 35 years almost to the day when this community college was established by my brother Schaff and Joe O'Brien and a few other citizens in Winsted who didn't think it was impossible to start a community college in the smallest community then having a community college in the United States. They were told, oh, you know, you can't do it, you can't do that. And they used to meet late at night in my dad's restaurant, and Schaff called it the Window Tappers Club, because after it was closed about 1 o'clock, Joe and others would tap on the window. And they'd come in and they'd work. It took a lot of work to set up this community college. I remember on this stage when I was in high school, sitting with other students, singing the Star Spangled Banner under the tutelage of Miss Saunier. How many of you remember that? She always got us over that difficult part, you know. So it's obviously wonderful to be back here. Growing up in Winsted was really quite convenient. We didn't really appreciate it at the time. Within 15 minutes walk, you know, there's the town and the streams and the woods and the lake and everything. And that's really at human scale compared to what a lot of children have to grow up in the big cities these days. And I never realized how important that was to me, because you really felt like nothing was too big to surmount. You had a whole mixture of nature and stores and libraries around the corner, and high schools and elementary schools. Most people didn't put their kids in buses. We just walked. And it was this was the high school here, as you know, Gilbert High. I remember once my dad said to me, let's go for a little ride. So we got into the car. He went for a little ride around Winsted. And he went up by the hospital. And he said, see this hospital? This was started with $10,000 from a wealthy woman in Winsted, about 1900. So I nodded, and then he drove around and he said, see, there's the high school. That was started by the owner of the Gilbert Clock Company with private philanthropy. I said, okay, I was wondering what he was getting at. And he went by the Beardsley Library and he said, this was another $10,000. Miss Beardsley started the library. And then he went by a little park and he said, well, this was established in the memory of somebody with some park benches up on the way to Crystal Lake. And then we went by a number of other places like that. And he said, you know, since these people started all these nice things, there were probably 300 people in town in the following 80 years that could have afforded to start other things too. Can you imagine what this town would have been like? So that was a deep imprint on me. And I was very lucky to grow up with parents who always asked us telling questions. Like my mother once said when I was about 9, she said, Ralph, do you love your country? I said, sure. She said, well, you better grow up and make it more lovable. It's a nice point. I always tried to obey my mother. One time I came home from 4th grade or 3rd grade, and I was wearing short pants, and the boys started wearing long pants. So of course I wanted to wear long pants. So I came home and I said, Mom, I want to wear long pants. She said, why? You're just a boy, a little boy. You wear short pants. No, I want to wear long pants. All the other boys are wearing long pants. He said, no, you're going to wear short pants. And I used my trump card. I said, well, you know, all their mothers let them wear long pants. And she looked at me, she said, well, they have their mothers and you've got yours. Well, we've been campaigning now since March 1st, started in California, in all 50 states, from Hawaii to Alaska, and to Florida, to Maine, and in some states more than once. And this is not the first time I've gone into all the states. We went into most of the states in the mid-60s against the insurance companies who were trying to destroy the right of injured people from having their full day in court against companies and others who hurt them, negligently or otherwise. But it was different in a unique sense. And that sense was that all those statistics we learned about in Washington, about the majority of the people falling behind in real wages, even in a booming economy, about the huge child poverty, about the environmental devastation, about the split between the super rich and the rest of the people in the country. All that came true just looking and talking around the country. We're campaigning with citizen groups. We're not looking for photo opportunities with two kids the way George W. Bush does. You know, he has a little podium sign here that says, "Leave no children behind," which is about all he's done in Texas, is to leave children behind. Second highest child hunger, the highest pollution rates, the highest number of children without health insurance. And really, well, it's amazing how many times he gets that picture, you've probably seen it, next to two little kids. You know, he's bending down like that just to get the image in. That's a lot of what politics has been about. And what we do is we look for citizen groups who are really fighting pollution, fighting against poverty, fighting to get more responsive government, fighting to build citizen groups, pressing for renewable solar energy, going after the HMO companies and who have been denying care right and left in places like California and around the country. I was in West Virginia once, and the coal companies were blowing off the tops of mountains to get at coal, and the rubble would go down into the streams and blocking the streams and shaking the dickens out of these little villages in the hollows. And they appealed to Washington, and Clinton Gore decided that they weren't going to move to stop the coal companies from doing this, even in the year 2000 AD. Living wages and all the things that are going on around the country, it constitute what a political campaign should connect with. That's the way you get an authentic political movement. And we're trying to, as you know, get on the debates, and that's pretty difficult these days. I was up there and got off the bus, and I had a ticket to go to the auditorium next to the debate auditorium. And I was confronted by the representative of the debate commission 2-3 nights ago, and he was surrounded by 3 state troopers. And he said, "Even if you have a ticket, Mr. Nader, you are not invited." I said, "Come again?" "I have a ticket." He said, "Even if you have a ticket, you are not invited, and you have to leave." So we went back, and then we came back again. The same thing happened. This is the kind of tyranny that that debate commission is imposing on significant third-party candidates, where you can't even sit in an auditorium and watch it because you have to go to a trailer right after, run by Fox Television News, that had invited you to comment on the debates. So today we're releasing a letter to the debate commission and to Gore and Bush, basically saying, if I don't get a written apology for this outrage, and if they don't contribute $25,000 to the Harvard Law School project on election reform, we're going to see them in court. last time that tens of millions of Americans who want four-way debates or multi-candidate debates, this is the last election cycle that this debate commission is going to have this kind of monopoly, this kind of key to the debate. They picked the wrong person to throw out. I just want to run through a few of the local issues here. General Electric, which specializes in poisoning rivers with PCBs, Housatonic River, Hudson River. This consent decree that was proposed just isn't enough. This is a devastating impact year after year after year that General Electric has been contaminating this river. It's one of the most profitable corporations in the world. It owns television stations that it doesn't even pay a living wage to the workers in the television stations. The head of it, Jack Welch, is multi-million dollars every year, huge pension plans, all kinds of private perks, and they're balking at spending the necessary money and cleaning up the river. You know, in some primitive societies, the most toughest punishment meted out to anyone is someone who poisons the drinking water, someone who poisons the environment that they have to live in. And this thing is nothing but a slap on the wrist, as Audrey Cole has pointed out again and again as she runs for the House of Representatives from this district on the Green Party. And they're trying to do the same thing, GE, with the Hudson River deal as well. Polluters have to pay. They have to pay for their damage. They have to pay for people who have lost the use of that river. They have to pay for any health costs, and they have to pay to make sure that river can be restored as best as possible for future generations to inherit. It wasn't their river to begin with. It was the people's river. It wasn't their river to use as a private toxic sewer. It was the river for people to use, for fishing, swimming, or whatever ways they want to use it. And it's time that we set up a system of law where corporations find out that it's much more expensive for them to pollute than not to pollute. Then the incentive. Now we have the situation with the Sharon Hospital. Here we go again. First it's the Winsted Memorial Hospital. Now the health center is underway. I certainly hope that this area gets a full-service primary hospital as soon as possible. I think the tide is turning. I think the tide is turning against some of these highly centralized, massive hospital centers. There needs to be more decentralization, if only for emergency purposes. More decentralization and more focus on primary care and preventive care. Sharon Hospital now apparently, having been run into the ground by people like Jim Sock and others, is now in the process of considering a conversion into a for-profit hospital. You know, New England didn't have for-profit hospitals, all non-profit hospitals. I think we're seeing again and again for-profit medicine is corporate medicine. It ties the hands of doctors and nurses, restricts their independent judgment, restricts what they can do, who they can refer a patient to, all for the almighty profit that goes up and rewards the stockholders and the executives so enormously. So that's another struggle. But that's what democracy is. It's just a struggle. As Winston Churchill said, it's the worst conceivable form of government except compared with all others. And democracy is something you have to renew and nourish and commit yourself to all the time. Otherwise, it begins to wear and deteriorate as the concentration of power in few hands undermines it. The concentration of power and wealth is really the biggest issue in this campaign, because that's what weakens our democracy and nullifies our power as voters, consumers, workers, and taxpayers. And from that base issue, we move on to our proposals, which are public funding and public campaigns. That no longer allows private money to nullify your vote. We need same-day voter registration. So people want to vote and they haven't registered, they go down on election day, they register, and they vote. Only 6 states have same-day voter registration. Connecticut does not. I think it's mid-October, isn't it, where it closes. Jesse Ventura said to me when I was up there visiting him in Minnesota that 3 things won for him. He was at 8% in the polls, and he got on the debates. He went to 19%. And then he got public financing from the state of Minnesota. He goes to 28% the weekend before the election. And then same-day voter registration. Lots of people, including young people, came down and voted, and he won a 3-way race, 38%. You see, those 3 really critical preconditions to give new political starts, new third parties, a chance to have a chance. Historically, third parties have dramatically changed the agenda for the 2 major parties. Whether it's anti-slavery, women's right to vote, trade union movement back in the 19th century, the farmer populist progressive movement starting in 1887 out of Texas. All these were spearheaded by third parties. The only third party that became a second party since 1850s was the Republican Party, which started in 1854 on an anti-slavery, pro-women's right to vote platform. You want to talk about controversy. You want to talk about pie in the sky. And 6 years later, they elected their president. Now here in Connecticut, and in 40 states, either Bush is way ahead or Gore is way ahead. Like Texas, Gore isn't even campaigning in Texas. New York State, Connecticut, heavily polled in favor of Gore. Those are the states where people who believe that the least of the worst of the 2 parties is their preference, they can basically direct their vote to the Green Party. What for? Because without a Green Party watchdog, with millions of votes after November, telling the 2 parties in Washington and their politicians and the government that they've surrendered to big business, that if they don't shape up for the American people, they're going to shrink down even further in future elections. Those 2 parties are going to continue to morph into one corporate party with 2 heads wearing different makeup, selling our government to the highest commercial bidders. This is what John McCain campaigned on. Campaign finance reform, when he said this whole process is nothing but a scam where politicians raise money from special interests in order to re-elect themselves and then sell the government to the corporate interests that funded their campaigns. Bill Bradley campaigned against racism. He campaigned against child poverty. He proposed measures in those areas. And Ross Perot campaigned to have more prudence and thrift in government, reduce the waste, at that time the deficit. All those voters now have no one to carry the torch to November except the Green Party ticket of Nader LeDuc. And people say, well, you can't win. And I say, what do you mean by win? I say, building a party into a major third party heading for majority status. That's a win. Bringing tens of thousands of people into progressive political activity all over the country in 50 states. Some of them very young people who are going to be the leaders of the future in this country in the advancement of justice. That's a win. And coming out of November 7th with millions of votes, and we just reached 7% nationwide in the zones we vote. Building toward future elections with thousands of Green Party candidates coming in, including many of you who want to run for local, state, and national office. That's a win. Rome wasn't built in a day. And a third party challenging the entrenched 2 parties who command the statutory barriers that make it difficult for third-party candidates in many states to even get on the ballot, with tens of thousands of signatures required in a place like North Carolina. The two parties who command most of the money, who command most of the media, and who command the psychology of too many voters, whose low expectation levels are such that they either stay home and don't vote, 51% of eligible voters stayed home in 1996, or they go to vote listlessly or with little enthusiasm for the lesser of two evils, or the least of the worst, or the bad Democrats over the worst Republicans. That's not a good enough choice for the American people. We need a better choice. In the auditorium, it's really funny the way you recollect these things. I remember there'd be like 200 people in a town meeting. And this was before everybody had to commute to Hartford and Waterbury for work. And about 5 or 6 citizens would jump up and protest to the selectmen and suggest things to the selectmen and the mayor. And I'd be looking around like this, you know, and other people would, you know, say, go, go, with body language. Or some of them were a bit embarrassed when 1 or 2 of them really drilled the selectmen, you know, just wouldn't say no. Like, you know, people here in Winsted who do that. Like Alan DeCara, for example. And next day, be down in front of our restaurant, and Mr. Friends would walk by. You know, people would point out, there goes Mr. Friends. You know, he was one of the active citizens. He'd always be at town meetings, be very well prepared. They say, there goes Mr. Friends. It's like, you know, saying, you know, there's the town citizen, just like the town drunk and the town fool. That really impressed me. Why is everybody pointing out Mr. Friends? They should be pointing out people who sat it out, who weren't active citizens. In other words, an active citizen was viewed almost as a freak. And that made an impression on me, because later I read in my books that the meaning of the word idiot in ancient Greece comes from the ancient Greek. You know what idiot meant in ancient Greece? An idiot was a person who didn't care about other people, a person who didn't care about the community. They called that person an idiot in ancient Athens. Well, let me tell you, most of the attitudes, stamina, determination, horizons, and aspirations that I have worked on in building many citizen groups and winning more than a few battles against the likes of General Motors and Pfizer and DuPont and Exxon and all the others, started right here in Winsted. Started right here in the local community. Working in my dad's restaurant, talking it up with the textile workers who came from across the street, salespeople, jurors rather, all kinds of people. Those were the most formative years for me. I had to start conversations on almost every conceivable topic in that restaurant. You know what they used to say about the Highland Arms? When you went into the Highland Arms for a nickel, you got a cup of coffee and 10 minutes of political conversation. So I want to say to the young people here, especially those who are working with Charlene Lavoie and the Community Advocate's Office, that you may think that Winsted is just not as glamorous and not as exciting as some of the big cities, but you're going to look back on this small town as one where you could spread your wings, where you could do things. You could walk down Main Street, or you could climb the hills, or go up to Highland Lake and be about as free as you can ever be. And you've got libraries here, you've got lots of opportunities. Just think of what life is like in the Bronx or Brooklyn or some parts of Los Angeles compared to a small town. Small town is really about the best place to grow up in if you're not an aficionado of rural life on the farm. So think of what the advantages are here, and Claire and others working to make this community advocate with Charlene, bring more people in, have more training for citizen skills, trying to get the local high school to broaden its training of students beyond the Freedom of Information Act. I think this is about the only high school in the country that actually develops a freedom of information skill among students. See? It takes about an hour or 2 hours to learn how to use the state and federal freedom of information law. So this community has lots of potential in direct proportion to how many citizens roll up their sleeves and become active in the community. There should be a citizen curriculum in the schools where the youngsters come out, skilled citizens. They know how to put coalitions together. They know how to get information out of City Hall. They know how to do profiles, voting profiles of their representatives. They know how to do all these things. And you've got years from K-1 to K-12 to do that. In order to help, we just happen to write a book on the subject called Civics for Democracy, a Journey for Teachers and Students. And the same for the community college. I've always thought the 1,200 or so community colleges in this country should be community centers. They should be places where people learn skills, can use laboratories to test drinking water or air samples. That's what a community college should be, not just on-the-job training for students, but on-the-job citizen training for students and for the community at large. I like the Connecticut Green Party compared to even other Green parties in other states because between elections they become citizen advocates. And do you remember that NFL Patriots boondoggle, that $500 million slush fund that the Democrats and the Republicans? That was an example of the two parties. One controlled the legislature, one controlled the governor's office. And they all got together and they said, hey, why should we spend $500 million repairing Connecticut schools and clinics and upgrading the public transit when we can lure the NFL football Patriots team to a new stadium funded by the taxpayers, to skyboxes if they're empty, guaranteed by the taxpayers. And along came Mr. Kraft, who owned the Patriots, and he came down, he had a big press conference. They rammed it through the legislature, as many of you remember. And the three television stations would break in breathlessly. They'd even interrupt Oprah to say, the Patriots are getting closer to the banks of the Connecticut River. The whole thing was a caricature when you look back on it. Here's Governor Rowland getting on TV and saying, this Patriots arrangement, this is not just about football. It's about spirit. It's about jobs. To which I said, yeah, real jobs. 8 days a year this company is open. And it's about putting Hartford on the map. So I envision entrepreneurs all over the country watching Monday Night Football and saying, watching the Patriots battle with some other team on the banks of the Connecticut River and saying, that's my town. I'm sending a factory there right away. Well, everybody was against us on that. 3-1 in the polls. We're favoring it because people didn't really know the grimy details of the arrangement. And I had a press conference with the Green Party. Remember Tom Savigny, Mike DeRosa, and others were there. And I started out saying, this stadium's never going to be built. And the press just absolutely laughed at us. But we knew what they didn't know. We knew that when you disseminate information about just how grotesque a deal this is, to make taxpayers pay for a sports entertainment team, when there are all kinds of needs in communities and towns all over the state that needed this money. And so in the next 4 months, we all took it apart. One thing after another spilled out, and the press started reporting it, editorials started coming out, and the Green Party, without overstating this case, was up front first against it, and organized a coalition against it, and had the whole petition drive against it, and went on talk radio against it, and the thing just started falling apart until in April, Kraft came to Hartford, to the embarrassed governor, at a news conference, said he's out of here, he's going to go back and build a stadium in the Boston area with private money for a change, not the taxpayers. That is what a party should be all about. And again, the Green Party has been with working people fighting for a living wage, right on the picket line. They've, challenged the safety of the Millstone nuclear plants. I'm always trying to find out What genius called a nuclear plant a millstone? It's really amazing. Not that we would have it any other way, right?
Rejected albatross.
That's right. The albatross nuclear plant, that's nice. They're the ones who started questioning the electricity deregulation in order to see why it was so adverse to ratepayers compared to the utility companies. And this is a tiny Green Party. They were strong probably because they didn't have any money. They had to spend time and move by their wits. And that is what we're trying to do around the country, not just to be like the other parties, a money machine, raising money from the fat cats, shaking the fat cats down while the fat cats bribe the politicians for present and future favors, as they did in the Republican convention in Philadelphia recently, the Democrat convention in LA. But to really connect with neighborhood and other groups throughout the communities and connect the political parties with the citizen groups. That's when it's most authentic, and that's when a party keeps its feet on the ground, and if it starts to stray, it's going to be pulled back, because it is going to be pulled back by the people. It is not going to be pulled up like a puppet by the financiers that have hijacked our democracy, weakened it, nullified the power of the people, and presided over systemic injustices and problems. You go around the country, just New Haven and Hartford, look at that. New Haven and Hartford, in one of the richest states of the country, look at the poverty, the desperation. 40% asthma rates in Hartford, in the inner city. The kids can't even breathe. You have 6 incinerators in that area, bringing trash from around the state and outside the state. Very high levels of pollution. They just happen to be situated where poor people live. You see? And same with New Haven. Here you have Yale University, the fountain of knowledge, known worldwide. How much of the knowledge is connected to solving the problems, or even proposing solutions, so people can have a decent standard of living? A few months ago, I met a woman who was 45 years old, mother of one, single mother, one child. I said, "Where do you work?" She said, "Walmart." I had to get a second-hand car and drive 8 miles every day to Walmart. And I said, "What do you do for daycare?" She said, I have to pay for it. And I said, "How much do you make in this company that's drowning in its own profits?" She said, $6.60 an hour. You know how bad things are for millions of workers in this country? The federal minimum wage is $5.15. It is $2.15 less in real purchasing power than it was in 1968. And the economy has doubled in size. Corporate profits have increased 6-fold. The stock market is staggeringly high. And people are making less today in purchasing power at that federal minimum wage than they were in 1968. That's not supposed to happen in America. It is, and it goes back to what Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said in 1941. He said, quote, "We can have a democratic society, or we can have the concentration of great wealth in the hands of the few. We cannot have both," end quote. And the two parties are ignoring that. They're ignoring the issue of power, concentrated power. They're not saying, and they're not telling us how they would shift power away from these global corporations that have no more allegiance to our country or community other than to control it, into the hands of the roles that we play: voter, consumer taxpayers, workers, and small saver investors. And that's what we're moving out in terms of the agenda all over the country. I want to take this opportunity to recognize 3 Green Party candidates. Audrey Cole, of course, is here. As a result, we're getting higher gasoline prices and lower fuel efficiency, which is now to the level of 1980. Can you imagine? It's been the average fuel efficiency of cars and SUVs has been going backwards in the last 8 years, not to 40 miles per gallon, which is what Clinton promised us in campaigning in 1992. The two parties are different in some ways, rhetorically. They are similar in most ways, dealing with WTO, NAFTA, corporate power, refusal to repeal Taft-Hartley, which obstructs tens of millions of workers from forming trade unions. They're not even very good on things that you might think they're good on. For example, the civil rights record of the Clinton Justice Department in 2 enforcement areas is worse than Reagan-Bush, according to the lawyers in the civil division of the Justice Department. They're worse on affirmative action, they're worse on police misconduct, and they're only better in housing discrimination. In civil liberties, you'd think the Democrats are better. Anthony Lewis, writing in the New York Times, 30 columns showing the abysmal record of Clinton on civil liberties, calling it the worst in modern American history. And in so many other areas, the Democrats are worse than the Republicans on corporate subsidies, handouts, bailouts, and giveaways, giving away our timber on the federal lands, giving away our minerals, literally. These are our assets. And so, raising money, they're both as bad as each other. They're raising money from the same corporate interests, and they brag about it, how one dinner wins over the Republicans, another dinner, Republicans win over the Democrats. I've been told, what about the Supreme Court? And I'd say, what about the Democrats? Who are your 2 worst justices? And they'll say Scalia and Thomas. I'll say, why did the Democratic Party let them get through the Senate? Scalia was voted in 98-0, including Senator Gore voted for Scalia. The only 2 non-votes were absentee Republicans who weren't in the Senate at the time. And Clarence Thomas, he got 11 critical Democrat senator votes that took him over the top, 52-48, in a Senate that was controlled by the Democratic Party with George Mitchell, majority leader. So what's the credibility of the Democrats on that issue as well? When you decide where and how you want to vote, ask yourself whether you want to vote for a fresh, new political party with great legislators like these candidates over here. If you want to vote for a party that you can build yourself, you don't just have to be a spectator. You can build as an organizer, as a canvasser. You can run for office as a party that's going to be a watchdog over the Democrat and Republican parties. And in the only language that these parties understand, losing votes from their column in future elections and being put in the Green Party column. When citizen groups fighting for a better country in Washington get closed out by 2 parties that are more look-alike, that's serious. That is a serious charge against those 2 parties, because throughout our history, that's where we got our social justice, from citizens, and then citizen groups, and then citizen movements. And when they're closing out the civil society, we're going to have to all go into political activity to bring back our democracy and raise it to the heights that will stunningly change this country for the better and raise our expectation levels much higher in practical terms than is now the case, where people are demoralized. They feel powerless. You can't fight City Hall. You can't fight Exxon. You drop out and don't vote. And young people come up and say to me, I'm not turned on politics. And I say to them, read your history. Because if you're not turned on politics, down to the air you breathe, the water you drink, the racial profiling you detest, the health insurance you and your family do not have, down to that level, if you're not turned on to politics, politics will turn on you in very disagreeable ways. Our website, for those of you who want to tap into much more of what's going on, as volunteers, as people who want to know what the positions are. We are trying to be an exemplary campaign. We believe in public funding and public campaigns, so we're going as far as possible in that direction. Unlike the Republican and Democratic parties, we're not taking corporate cash, we're not taking political action committee money, we're not taking the corrupt soft money. We are only receiving individual contributions, mostly from people around the country. And therefore, we are practicing what we preach so we can preach what we practice. And I hope the Hartford Courant will duly recognize that exemplary conduct in one of their editorials, or maybe the local papers because the major press keep bemoaning the corruption of money in politics, but they never say, but there's a Green Party that's doing it right. And as I said earlier, we're campaigning with citizen groups on the ground, helping to strengthen them, give them visibility as they strengthen us around the country. It seems quite clear to me that challenging the entrenched two parties is like climbing a sheer cliff with a slippery rope. But I like these kinds of underdogs. Think of the pleasure when you climb that cliff. And we're going to do it step by step. A great leap forward will occur with your help on November 7th. And after that, just think, we'll be the number 3 party in the country in numbers and votes, and we'll be the number 1 party in the country in integrity and in representing the real interests of the American people in order to strengthen. So those of you who want to help out, are there cards here? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, you can fill out the cards and we'll just stay in touch with you. You know what it takes to build a majority new party? But it has a great agenda that most people resonate with. We're dealing with workers and consumers and environment and health insurance and respecting taxpayer assets and all the rest, and giving people power in a clean election. What it takes, 1 million people devoting 100 volunteer hours a year and raising $100 a year. And when you think of what our forebears sacrificed for us for over 200 years, when they laid their livelihoods, they risked so much to generate more levels of justice for more people in this country. When you looked at what they had done for us, $100, 100 hours, and 1 million people, that's not one of history's great sacrifices, is it? And that's what we want to do all over the country. I want to end on this note. Critical to everything in human affairs is the expectation level of its people. If they have a high expectation level for justice, for opportunity, for tolerance, for involvement, for the creative arts, for the environment, you name it, for peace, if they have a high expectation level, they're going to demand more of others who are ruling them and themselves, who must be the core of the people's sovereignty over this country, not corporate sovereignty over this country. This country is meant to be run by people, not run by increasingly remote, absentee corporations. If you look at what Winsted could be like in 10, 20 years, in terms of healthcare, sustainable environment, in terms of fun, in terms of opportunities, in terms of the creative arts for youngsters who say they don't have anything to do after school and they're idling around. You think what the natural resources of this area can bring? You think what we can use modern telecommunications for? You can see what City Hall and city government can do in their own purchasing power to become more efficient and to use more sustainable technologies. Ancient Athens, which gave us such genius, was only 42,000 people in population. And it gave us some of the greatest playwrights, the greatest poets, the greatest historians, the greatest people in the Periclean age, who gave us some of our fundamental democratic origins with a small d. And I think we ought to try to do that. And I think the community advocate is just one effort to broaden those horizons and bring young people and others into engagement in local government and local policymaking. And I hope this community college here becomes more involved with Winsted. It has a lot to offer it. It shouldn't be quite as cloistered as it has been. It should connect more, both in terms of night courses, where we learn how to shop more effectively as consumers. We learn how to be more skilled citizens, we learn more how to shape our future from the local community all the way up to the national and global community. I want to thank you all for coming. It's obvious a work day here, and not many people could take off from work. I want to thank Joe O'Brien as well for his work over the years, both in city government, as a journalist, and now as a historian of the area. And I want to thank many of you who I can recognize and who've been allies in some of our controversial struggles here in the community, and especially urge you to think about your vote in terms of what you want it to mean in a state that Gore is way ahead and doesn't, even if you want Gore to win over Bush, you want some new power to be placed in a new political party like the Green Party. And you'll see the two parties begin shaping up, or they're going to shrink down. The dynamics of the two-party domination of our politics will change after November because of millions of Americans who are saying to themselves, never again will we vote for the least of the worst. If we want our senators and representatives to vote their conscience in Congress, then we must vote our conscience at the voting booth in November. Candidacy and the three candidates here, Audrey Cole, Tom Ethier, and Tom Savigny. Be sure to go over there and ask them where they stand on issues that are of deep concern to you. On behalf of them all, let's use these next 5 weeks until November 7th to replace small talk with our neighbors, co-workers, relatives, and acquaintances with progressive talk. With progressive political talk, which historically has always been the yeast from which progressive and just movements for the American people have emerged from. And in 5 weeks, talking up your own circle before whom you have great credibility of relatives, co-workers, neighbors, and friends, you can bring whole groups of people to the polls. And the voter registration work being done by Gilbert High School students, where are you? Are you somewhere here? There you are. They're going to be... Let's try to get the highest voting turnout of any town in Connecticut. Hey. And let's get the highest... and that means the highest registration levels to bring more of those non-voters, as they are anonymously called, back in to engagement in our democratic society. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and this question is, are you going to make sure that I carry my hometown? Yeah! Parties, Democrat and Republican, are pretty entrenched here, and there are many Winstedites who just automatically go Democrat or Republican. I mean, nationwide, I said once a few weeks ago, if the Republican Party nominated Humpty and the Democratic Party nominated Dumpty, that 30% of the people, 30% of the vote would go one way, 30% of the vote would go the other, just because people grow up Democrat or Republican. They're grandparents, they're great-grandparents. And I'm saying that if they did that in 1854 and 1860, there would have been a Democratic Party. And if they did that earlier, when Jefferson started what is now the Democratic Party, there wouldn't have been a Democratic Party. So it's time to basically ask yourself what you want your vote to mean. And I would be most gratified if we pulled a big vote out of the town of Winchester, which gave so much to me that I want to give back. Thank you. the signer here. This is one of the great demonstrations of progress in our society.